Hello, everyone. My name is Shirley Collette. I'm the head of community at Boston New Technology. I'm very excited today. We are broadcasting at Boston New Technology, a fireside chat, an exclusive one with Chris McDowell, the visionary founder behind Quilt, a revolutionary platform changing the landscape of how we commemorate our loved ones. As Chris shares his entrepreneurial journey, delving into the genesis of Quilt and blah, we're gonna cut all that. I'm so nervous that I just messed up with all the wording. I am
Nice.
really excited to have you here today, Chris. I welcome all our audience to come and listen to you as you tell your valuable story, and we can learn from you. So, how are you today, Chris?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here this morning.
I'm glad to have you here. So, can you tell our audience a little bit about who you are, where you come from, what you do?
Sure. Yeah, a little bit about me. I grew up on Long Island in New York. Had a or have a big family, big extended family, but spent a lot of time in Boston. Went to Northeastern and then Harvard. So I spent about and then started my career in Boston, actually on Boylston Street, working at an old book publisher called Houghton Mifflin Harcourt. Love the Boston area. And after spending time there, moved to New York City and really found kind of venture-backed startups. And my career has predominantly been the first or early finance hire for venture-backed startups, helping with financial planning and fundraising and pricing strategy. Finance for startups is generally a catch-all for everything that is not sales, technology, and marketing. So it's really been a great journey in my career, learning kind of the startup ecosystem. And now I am living in Connecticut with my wife Andy and our newborn son Bennett, who just turned 6 months old, who's
Congratulations.
been an absolute joy.
That's wonderful. So, today we're going to talk about another baby that you have.
Yeah.
We're going to talk about Quilt. Tell us the story behind the creative name of your startup, Quilt. How did you come up with it, and what does it signify? What inspired you to start it, to
Yeah,
begin?
so I'll start with kind of what inspired me to start Quilt. Quilt's taken a couple of iterations, but in its current form, Quilt really started after my sister had passed away earlier last year. And I was kind of the person in my family who raised their hand and said, "Hey, everyone, send me your photos and send me your memories of Laura, and I'll put it together in a slideshow, and we'll play it during the memorial service." And at the time, I could have bit off more than I can chew in that it ended up taking me, 5 or so hours the night before the service, kind of sitting alone in front of a computer, which is not, the place you want to be while you have one of the worst experiences of your life, a loved one
Right.
passing. Um,
Especially when you don't expect that.
exactly. And so, obviously I wasn't thinking about Quilt in the moment, but 2 months afterwards, as I was reflecting on Quilt and reflecting on my sister's passing and kind of all of that stuff you experience so quickly, it takes a while to unpack it. And I realized there was a real pain point that that's the last thing families should be spent doing is having this isolating experience of gathering all the photos. And of course, seeing the photos and memories was the kind of the highlight of all of that. But figuring out file formatting and did someone tag me on Facebook or text message me this or email it to me and trying to aggregate it and then getting it over to the funeral home. was very time consuming, and I thought there had to be a better way. And so as I think about quilts, the name really comes from this idea of a family quilt, which I have this idea in my head of like, family quilts being passed down generation to generation, and each, subsequent generation kind of creating their own square that tells a story, and they pass it on to the next generation. And it really, at least for me, brings this idea of permanence and tradition and storytelling that comes with being a family.
Right. That's very beautiful. Let's look at the big picture. The death tech industry. That's an interesting term. People don't really aware of that there is a whole industry around it, but they do happen to face it. We're already aware of live funeral that are broadcasting already and bringing people from the death as a augmented reality, telling their story of their lives. So we're already facing it. Can you tell me and the audience a little bit about this industry and what Quilt take part of it?
Sure. Yeah, death tech. I'm still getting used to saying that out loud. It sounds a bit harsh, and as I
Yeah.
reflect on it, I think it's intentionally harsh in the sense that people generally don't like to talk about death. They don't like to talk about, losing loved ones or the idea of losing loved ones. And so whoever coined the phrase death tech, I think was intentional in that, hey, we're talking about it. Let's, get it out there. Todd, who I work with on Quilt, he's a co-founder. He likes to use the phrase empathy tech, which is a little bit softer, and
Mm-hmm.
I like that a little bit better. But as you think about what happens when people pass away or they're approaching that point, there's a lot of things to organize and think about. Whether, as you mentioned, live streaming funerals or people's end of life care and hospice and even coordinating things like wills. There's a lot to think about when people are kind of approaching their end of life, and it's historically been an antiquated industry. There hasn't been a lot of technology to support it, and so as I told
Right.
this story about my sister, like it's not that there's this groundbreaking AI technology that I needed at that time. It's really just bringing kind of that industry and up to speed with technology, and using technology to make difficult times a little bit less difficult. And
I understand.
that's kind of how Quilt falls into that.
Yes. Where is Quilt currently in its journey? Can you tell us more about the startup? What stage are you at? What's the type of the business? And how are you really reaching out to your audience?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, I'm working on Quilt with Todd, who's a former colleague of mine, um, and we recently launched pilots with four funeral homes and funeral home owners, which could reach up to close to 50 funeral homes. And really, the process that we're in now is, you know, we want to get feedback, right? I have my
Right.
own personal experience that provided the insight into forming Quilt in what we're providing today, but we really want to be great partners to funeral homes. It. I mentioned kind of the family side of it, but for funeral homes, it's actually very time consuming for them as well. It wasn't all that long ago that people were bringing in physical photos and photo boards and things like that to display photos at a service. And now the funeral home is, having to work with families and who are bringing in USB drives and emailing them things. And, funeral homes are still burning DVDs. And so we want to enable the funeral home to help the family. And part of that is, saving them time by not having to deal with the IT and tech. And we take that on and kind of take the funeral home out of being the middleman. And so with these pilots, we're really hoping to get a lot of learnings as to how we can do that better. And then, really in terms of go to market and reaching these funeral homes, it's emails, it's cold calls, it's showing up at a funeral home and talking to them, because the feedback we've been getting is this is going to save us so much time, because we lose, a full person for half a day when they're trying to do all this stuff with photos. And the funeral home industry is so compassionate and they really want to help families. And so they just take it on themselves and they just do it. And because that's who they are. And so if we can help them and give them a little bit more technology to make their life easier, they can focus on the thing they do best, which is creating this environment for a funeral or for a service where the family can really feel supported, and creating a great atmosphere for them to grieve. We try to make
Right.
the funeral home's life a little bit easier as well.
Let's talk really quick about the platform itself. So it's basically people, instead of like what you had experienced, having people sending you over WhatsApp, text messages, Facebook, whatever, sending you photos, videos, stories, they upload it themselves and share it. Can you explain a little bit more?
Sure. So the way the product is set up is, we'll partner with a funeral home, and when a family comes in, they'll say, here's a link to set up your photo memorial. And the family, instead of, in my case, I sent out an email and posted on Facebook, hey, everyone email me your stories and your photos of
Mm-hmm.
Laura. I would say, hey, post those stories or photos on Quilt, and I would send a link. And so, when someone in my family or friends go and click that link, they'll be able to see what everybody else has posted. So it's not as isolating of a feeling. I'm not the only one receiving the photos. Everyone gets to kind of see what everyone else has shared, and interact on that a bit. You can comment and interact with the folks who've uploaded the photos. And then what Quilt does is take all of those photos and automatically produce a slideshow for the funeral home. So the funeral home doesn't, all they have to do is plug in a simple link and display
Mm-hmm.
it on a television during the service. So they don't have to, as I mentioned, it takes them out from being the middleman. They don't have to, crop
Right.
photos and play with file sizes and things like that.
Right. Thank you for clarifying that. When we get together to talk about someone that we love, that we lost, we don't talk about how he died. We talked about how he lived. There was a person named Yigal Allon. He is an Israeli military leader and politician, a great leader and an educator. And he said, a nation that doesn't know its past, its present is weak, and its future is unknown. As a human being, it is crucial for us to know who we are and where we come from, because this is built us. So how does quilt in its essence contribute to preserving memories and creating a lasting tribute to those who have passed away?
Yeah, so I think with quilts, the idea is that when you're building this memorial for someone who's passed, it isn't just for the day of the service. It lasts, well beyond that. I know I use quilt for my sister's 6-month celebration of life, and I still look at it often. I can pull it up and when my family's over and put it on a television in my house. And
Mm-hmm.
um, in aggregating photos and memories in this way, we got to hear so many stories that we never would have heard before from my sister's colleagues and people that we never met, but my sister had really close relationships with. And hearing those
Right.
stories is one thing, but being able to actually document them and be able to go back and look at them, I also think about with my son. unfortunately won't meet my sister in person, but he'll be able to hear all these great stories about Laura, and it creates a memorial where we'll never forget these stories. And that's what's really has me passionate about Quilt is
Right.
it really has an emotional impact on the families that we hopefully get to serve and support.
Right. And not just never forget, it's also to share it with your children and your grandchildren so they also can see it. In Judaism, there's something called Shiva. It's 7 days that you have to stay in your home and sit, like actually sit down and think about the person that you lost. And you have so many people coming over and telling you all these stories.
Yeah.
But this is actually a fact because maybe in the essence of the present you remember it and you're like, wow, this is true, and I never heard about this before, and I'm so happy you get to share this. But maybe then after you don't really remember it, and I think that this is a really wonderful opportunity for those people not only tell it to you in person but also share it on and document it. That this is great. Also, there is something called Yearside, which is every year everybody gets together and talk about the person. So this is like what you just said, what you're doing with your family and your sister. Creating a community-driven project like Quilt for remembering loved ones is a beautiful idea. What makes Quilt unique in this aspect, and how does it emphasize the power of community over individual remembrance? We
Yeah,
spoke a little bit about it.
we touched on it a little bit, but I think it's creating an environment, and with Quilt's case, a kind of digital environment where people can go and remember and celebrate and grieve their a loved one, you know, when and where that time works for them, and they can we talked about seeing what other people have shared and going back and kind of reminisce on stories that they might have forgotten.
Right.
You know, isolation in a time of sadness like this is a tough place to be. And so, being able to create kind of a community where people feel comfortable to grieve and do it in a way where they can share memories with others who are also grieving becomes really important. It makes sure
Right.
you feel that you're not alone, and that you have other people to support you through it.
Exactly. Exactly. So every journey comes with its challenges. Could you share some of the hurdles Quilt faced and how you overcome them? And what's the feedback been like from people using Quilt for you?
Sure. So I'll start with some of the challenges. So as I mentioned, Quilt was what we're talking about today is the hopefully final version of Quilt, but this idea of preserving memories and curating memories has been something I've been thinking about for a couple of years. And there was actually an earlier version of Quilt that was more focused around um, the idea that we all have phones in our pockets and are recording almost every moment of our life today, but we're not going back and looking at it in the way that we used to. We're not.
Right.
When I grew up, I looked at old VHS tapes with my family. We flipped through photo albums, and we spent more time curating content. Whereas a lot of the tools today, like Instagram and Facebook, they're great for what they are, but they're more instant satisfaction content, not this idea of passing it on generation to generation. So that was I actually had created a version of Quilt probably almost a year and a half ago, based on that hypothesis. And I think getting to the learning of that, we launched it fairly unspectacularly. I think we were slow to adopt users. And in general, I think the feedback was that, you know, that version was a nice to have, not a need to have, right? It was, you know, more geared towards people being proactive and sorting through their photos and tagging their family and creating this time capsule. And I think, you know, as much as people want to be proactive, the day gets away from you and you end up just dealing with whatever happens that day.
Right.
Um, so the challenge we faced there was the initial version of Quilt really solving a problem, or was it a nice to have product? And I think the feedback in that version is, you know, it was a nice to have. There wasn't a real pain point we were solving. And while the idea resonated with a lot of people, you know, being able to really focus on what pain point am I solving and truly understand that from an individual's perspective, and then creating a product towards that, um, it is you have a much better outcome than a nice
Right.
to have product. And so that was certainly a challenge, but a great learning, and really has helped me focus in how I'm building Quilt today. And yeah, to going full circle, it's resonating in the feedback we're getting from funeral homes and families, which is, you know, we save them a lot of time. They, you know, hadn't had a tool like this that helped kind of funeral homes and families collaborate on something like this, where you know, we've made a difficult period a little less difficult
Mm-hmm.
and created something that's everlasting that they can go and look at, and a you know, something that's not a DVD that will
Right.
inevitably get lost in somebody's cabinet at home.
Right. Wow. Wow, that's amazing. Finding the real why and how to solve a real pain point. Double meaning actually here. Um, Looking ahead, where do you envision Quilt in the future?
So I think, you know, we're obviously really focused on this one problem of, you know, gathering and displaying photos for memorial services. But the more we talk to funeral homes, I think there's a much bigger opportunity for them to be enabled by technology, that will save them time, make the process of how they interact with families that they work with a little bit easier. You know, funeral homes are traditionally third or fourth generation family businesses, and so with that comes a lot of the, you know, traditional old ways of doing things,
Right.
like, and so with this new generation of, you know, the family business owners, they're used to technology helping them, and so we think this is potentially just the start of our ability to help funeral homes. And the other component to that is, right now we're focused in the U.S., but I think, you know, this can certainly be something that can expand beyond the U.S.
Right.
Pretty quickly. But we want to make sure that we've really gotten a great product before trying to get it out too quickly.
Right, I understand. Throughout this call, actually, I've been thinking about Israel all the time, and I think this is a market that unfortunately needs this, and I would love to make some connections and see how you can move forward from there for sure.
Yeah,
Not
absolutely.
only B2B, I actually think B2C can work there as well. This is something to think about. I'm just putting it out there.
No, I'd love to talk about it.
Yeah, definitely. Um, do you have a motto or philosophy that guides you that you walk by?
I don't know if it's necessarily a motto, maybe a philosophy. You know, my dad always had this incredible way of reading a room and getting a sense of how people are feeling in a certain time, and silly things of like, knowing if someone needed a refill on their drink, or being able to like pick up on people, are they upset? Are they whatever it might be? And I think I've always kind of interpreted that, or how I took that as, being able to put yourself in other people's shoes,
Mm-hmm.
especially, around if there's decisions being made or something like that. Being able to put yourself in people's shoes and seeing it from their perspective, you know, on a personal side of things, you never know what's going on in someone's life. And so it opens you up to handling situations with, a little bit more kind of compassion and understanding. And then on the professional side of it, as I think about putting myself in someone's shoes, it's putting yourself in the customer's shoes. And the more you understand, the pain points that they deal with, and, some of the problems that they're facing, ultimately it allows you to take that feedback and create a better product with it.
Right.
And so it's kind of, encompasses that compassion and empathy.
Wow. Wow. I loved it. Totally can relate to this, and it makes sense why you, out of anybody else, were thinking about this specific thing. Wow. Thank you for that.
Yeah, of course.
And my last question for today, before we move on to our audience questions. Boston New Technology is a fantastic community. As you take this stage right now, what would you like to ask from us or share with us regarding Quilt and your journey?
Yeah, that's a tough one. I think honestly, I'm just excited to be here and be a part of the community. I think one of the benefits of starting a company like Quilt is I get to talk to a lot of people, and they ultimately share some really good personal stories about, people passing in their family and things like that. And on that note, I would appreciate any feedback or any stories or any, how you think about, Quilt, and in any way it could help you. I'd love to hear kind of feedback on that. Um, and I want to be able to give back to this community as well. It's as you said, a
Yep.
terrific community. So if there's anything I can do to be helpful, even with my professional career in startups and things like that, always happy to help, and feel free to reach out.
That's wonderful. Thank you. We really appreciate it. So I'm just telling everybody we're going to share the video. We're going to share the link to Quilt if you want to try it out and give some feedback. We're going to share resources with you guys. Let me go quickly to the chat. I see a question here. Or just saying, Jason is saying, great to have everyone here. Feel free to, oh, I can say it too. Um, Everybody, if you're still here, feel free to introduce yourself in the chat and let us know if you have any more. This is the time for your questions, everybody. If you have,
Cool. Yeah, great job. Yeah, really love what you're building, and surely, I really loved all the questions you were asking too. Um,
thank you.
for Chris, yeah, you told some amazing stories, and love the kind of personal time, giving your own stories here too. What were some of from your customers or audience, like what were some of the stories that resonated most with you in terms of knowing that you really built something that impacted so many people?
Yeah, I think just recently I was actually at a funeral home, and I was talking to both the funeral home owner and the office manager. And typically the office manager is the one who gets stuck gathering all these photos and handling kind of last minute requests and things that happen the day of the service. And um, you know on the funeral home side, they were just really excited that this office manager can dedicate their time to, again, providing a great space and a place for the families to grieve and not be pulled in a million different directions. And then on the family side of it, I think the my favorite one that we've gotten has been around like, oh, I didn't even know, so and so did this, or that photo existed, or that someone captured that. I think being able to
Oh,
see what other people have uploaded, and like, and being able to kind of go down memory lane, um, for photos that you might not have otherwise seen because they're, on someone's phone or in someone's house.
oh,
That's
that's amazing. Um, and yeah, my last question here was, has anybody used it in ways that you didn't expect or like didn't intend, yeah, didn't expect when you set out building this?
Not yet, but and we're still in the early days, right? We just launched the product in November, but we've certainly had a number of people say, "Oh, this would be great for a wedding or another type of event where you're gathering a lot of photos rapidly for the same
mm-hmm.
thing." Um, and so obviously that we've kind of put that on the back burner, but it sits in our brain of, all right, maybe that's something we can explore after we really nail what we're doing here. But we think there's just such a big opportunity in the sort of end of life funeral space.
Great. I appreciate
Right.
that. Yeah,
Wow.
always good to stay
What
focused.
a great question. What a great question. We have another question from Carl. What it's been like for you to transition from CFO in a venture-backed startups to being a founder of your own?
Um, So it's been interesting because I've been in a number of startups from early days, and so I've seen a lot of it. But I would say, um, I thought I wore a lot of hats in my professional, CFO for venture backed startups career. You wear a million times more. We were going to an event, and I was running to the printer to pick up one page flyers that we can hand out at the event. Um, but I think the part that I've really enjoyed and loved the most is being able to talk to customers and talk to families and understand, that it is what we're creating really solving a problem, and how can we get better, because at this early stage there's an opportunity to get better at every single second of every day, and so being able to be collecting that feedback from folks has been incredibly rewarding.
Wow, that's great. I have another question for you. This is from Jason. Any early thoughts on Quilt 2030? Is the company exclusive? Oh, I think it's sort of the same, but let me go on. Is the company exclusive death tech? Does this concept make sense in other sectors? So I think
Yeah.
you,
So I think it's similar to,
Jay.
folks asking about weddings. I think when you think about any large event or any event that's centered around a specific person or group of people, this could be applicable. I think about a 75th birthday party. You can send out a link ahead of time and gather a lot of photos for that. So I think it definitely becomes applicable in other sectors. I think the way we've thought about it, as I think about weddings, for example, it might be best to get into that market in a B2B to C fashion, similar to what we're doing with funeral homes, where maybe we partner with event planners, which then leans into maybe corporate events could be another example where this might fit. So short answer is yes. I think we can expand beyond death tech, but I think in Quilt 2024 we have a lot in front of us to tackle before we start to really flesh that out.
Right, right. Thank you for the question. Thank you for the response. Do we have anyone else here who would like to share a question? Debbie. Debbie says, great product for folks, funerals, makes most people feeling a bit uncomfortable, a way to feel part of the event?
Yeah, I think one of the things I didn't mention, and it's kind of a little bit more tactical, but when we display the photos during a service, there's actually a QR code that people can scan, where if they attended the service and they didn't realize people were collecting photos, they can scan the QR code and upload photos right then. But
Mm-hmm.
once they scan the QR code, they also can see on their phone all of the other photos people have uploaded. And so, yeah, that has two impacts. You ultimately are able to get more photos from people and memories from people who attended. But because Quilt is fully digital, it allows people who are unable to attend a service to be able to, you know, see everything that um, all the photos that, you know, people who are there physically get to see as well.
Right, right. A lot of people today does check in want to show the whole world that they were there. That's another place that they can check in and say, "Hey, I honored too. I was there too."
Yeah, we haven't thought about the check-in part just yet, but hey, I can see it being being something.
A really good friend of mine that I participated in her husband's funeral, she said, "I looked back 3 years after, and only then I realized that you were there." I think it's important for them to know, maybe of course not at the moment, but years
Yeah,
after, to know who was there in the
yeah,
honor of the event. So
that's a great point.
yeah, wow, what an important topic, heavy topic to talk about, but yet we were able to make it conversational. Thank you so much for bring this to the world. Thank you for the lovely talk, for being with us today. I'm looking forward to more of this in the future. I thank you everybody for being with us today on Ecos AI. The recording will be on YouTube and on Ecos, and see you again in 2 weeks in our next fireside chat. Thank you, really thank you.
Thank you so much, Shirley. I appreciate it, and thank you for everybody joining.
I'm going to stop the recording. Bye bye.